Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing the new National Bar Association president, Dominic Calhoun. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thank you for joining us. How, did,
Absolutely. It's my
how does it
pleasure to
feel to
be
be president?
here. Hey, look, it comes with its challenges and its triumphs. I enjoy every bit of it. It is important for us to make sure that the opinions and perspectives of Black lawyers are out front. And that is the absolute complete joy that I've had over the last month. And to continue to do that is a blessing. So being here with you today is also right in line and step with that. So thank you for all that you do and have done in the organization, keeping Black lawyers relevant throughout this digital age. And we at the National Bar Association just look forward to assisting in any way that we can.
Great, great. Well, I make all my guests play a round of hot topics, whether they want to or not. So
I don't want to. So let's move past that. No, I'm just kidding.
So my audience knows that we try to keep up with Black legal news. Again, I know you don't practice all these areas alone. Most of my guests do not. So it can be your personal opinion. First up, we have Harrison Floyd, who is one of two Black co-defendants of I guess it's a total of 18 co-defendants that Donald Trump has in his pending Georgia election interference case. So, there's a lot of buzz about all the cases against Donald Trump, but I think this one is interesting because, you have a Black DA, Fannie Willis, going up against him. And then you also, in this particular case, you actually have Black co-defendants. So I think this case kind of stood out from the other cases. Another reason why this case stood out is because poor Harrison Floyd learned, I think, what they said, what race he was, because he was not let out. He turned himself voluntarily in. His white co-defendants were able to also turn themselves in and immediately bond out or even arrange for bond ahead of time. So it was smooth in and out. I think Donald Trump was in there for a cool 20 minutes and also and they allowed him out. But Harrison learned something new, I think, that day, that he wasn't going to be treated the same way. And so he was denied bond. And at least the reasoning at the time was that there was another pending case in another jurisdiction where the judge felt like maybe he would be a flight risk, even though he voluntarily drove down to turn himself in. So what are your thoughts on maybe race playing a part in the fact that they kept him in? I think he stayed a whole week before they gave him 100K bond.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question that we constantly deal with within our community, right? That we always like to say that the law is colorblind, right? Lady Justice she wears a blindfold for that reason, but we also know that that's not accurate, not in this country. Race has always played an integral part within the legal system. It's been there since the beginning of time, right? From the Jim Crow laws to before that with the slavery and what was required for policing, as an example. It's always been there. It's an undercurrent. And to the way you put it, right, he may have learned something new about the criminal justice system that he didn't anticipate before. And so without really opining about the President Trump and all aspects of that legal matter, I think it is really something to look at, right? Because regardless, every defendant is innocent until proven guilty, right? The criminal justice system requires beyond reasonable doubt, which is the higher standard that we have within this country, versus what I practice, which is preponderance of the evidence from a civil standpoint. So you have to literally prove your case. And for all those other defendants, I think it's 18 of them, 19 of them. Yeah. Just like you said, for President Trump, who has 3 federal indictments elsewhere, to come in 20 minutes and say, okay, on your own reconnaissance, you can go on about your business. Well, he not his own reconnaissance because he actually had a bail, but to say in 20 minutes, here's your bail and let's move on. And then for the one Black defendant to be left there for a week, I think there is something to look at. And again, this has nothing to do with the matter of Trump, but rather within our criminal justice system. Our goal in advancing the interests of African-American lawyers and judges is to make sure that the criminal justice system and, quite frankly, the justice system as a whole is fair to everyone. And it'd be hard pressed for us to understand why that one lone defendant was stuck there, barring some other matter, when there's so many others that have other pending charges as a part of this alleged RICO. So it is something to bear witness to, and I think it is something that should be looked at.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, someone said, well, there's technically one other Black co-defendant who's a female that got out, but I still think that it just played a role. It's just like you said, this is bigger than, whether you're pro-Trump or not, or because this guy, I think, was like the head of his organization called Blacks for Trump or something. So this has nothing to do with, political affiliation. This really has to do with, just like you said, the general sentiment of how we're treated once we are brought through the criminal justice system. And I think it was probably a sobering moment for him, a humbling moment when he learned everybody else was getting out except for him. I think he learned a bigger lesson that day. Well,
Yep.
moving from Georgia to California, our brother Reggie Bush, who is a former USC player, obviously a big NFL player. At the time when he was at USC, if you're listening, you don't know a little bit about his case. I mean, he currently is suing the NCAA for defamation because they accused him for pay for play back in the day, and they took his Heisman Trophy. And obviously, once you have a Heisman Trophy, there are a lot of like sponsorship deal. There could have been some other things that could have come from that if he had kept his trophy. So obviously, since you are a civil lawyer, there are some damages there. He can prove by, if he can show that it really was defamation, that it was an untrue statement for them to say, that he did pay for play. I guess some people's question, I think about this case, it's been so many years, right? So many years this has happened. I was just thinking about it all this time. I know our brother attorney Ben Crump is his attorney for this matter. So some people are like, why did you wait all this time to kind of go back after them for this? And the answer to that is there is, I want to say in the last 2 years, they loosened the rules for the NCAA. So athletes, all college athletes, US college athletes can now, one of my favorite topics, because I'm actually an IP attorney, is name, image, and likeness. If you got a name, image, and likeness, come to me. That I love those deals. I love those deals. So if people are wondering like, why is he just now bringing this up? It's because it was just a year and a half ago that they said that Angel Reese and Flage, and I don't know. There's so many of them now. These are 19, 20-year-old kids raking in multi-million-dollar deals, promoting TurboTax with their likeness, chicken wings with their likeness, any product or service you can think of, they can promote it with their likeness and get paid while they're still in college, and they are not being obviously penalized for that. So, not that the rule is going to be retroactive. We understand that retroactively you can't apply the law, but I think his suit is more about that he wasn't really even involved really in a pay for play, and they just use that kind of as an excuse to take his trophy away. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, barring and not really getting into what the new rules are versus what was before, I think what's really important is to acknowledge the fact that Reggie Bush's life was detrimentally impacted. I don't see any way that the NCAA or others could argue that. I mean, he became an overnight sensation, an overnight story. Yes, he won the Heisman, but in my overnight scenario, what I mean is he was immediately dogged in the commerce, right? People didn't give him the deals. He probably could have went higher in the draft. He could have received more endorsement deals and the like. But there was this belief that he had skirted the rules, that he had altered the way that NCAA guidelines and the way that they administered the rules. They basically accused him of skirting around that. And then receiving this money, this pay for play. I think what's important in looking at his analysis, and I really got to go back and remember this, but as far as I recall, seeing this as a kid, right? I don't remember them actually providing any substantive evidence that said that he took money from anyone or in particular to for his own personal gain or benefit. Now, again, that's with me not going back through the process and looking at everything. I cannot remember. And the reason I say that is because if it is true, and my memory serves correct, that it didn't happen, that there wasn't, even taking the example that I said before, the preponderance of an evidence, right? The 51% that you can actually convince that this happened, even if you didn't have that, you don't have the evidence, and it was just all speculation. I mean, you somewhat ruined this black man's life, the opportunity, the potential that he had to go wherever he wanted to do and write his check. I mean, he was a Heisman Trophy winner. Heisman Trophy winners are supposed to be able to write that check, right? You got 3 to 4 years in the NFL where everyone looks to you as that next rising star. And because of all of this, I'll call it innuendo and accusations and assertions around his name, that became, I remember, that became this, sticking point. I remember when he went to New Orleans and people were like, can he make it? It was always that, I mean, Reggie Bush, you know what I mean? And it just, kudos to the brother. I know Attorney Crump well. He's been a crusader ever since that case with Trayvon took him to new heights, and he's our Attorney General, as they say, the black man's Attorney General, black woman's Attorney General, and so he's been fighting for these causes, and kudos to him for taking on Reggie as a client to really try to get him justice, and that's what my world, I know you're in the name, image, and likeness. My world is the harm, right? Let's rectify harms that have been associated with people, and that's the big deal. So I hope he gets retribution for what happened to him.
For sure. Well, moving to Texas, a little closer to your backyard, there was a big murder case. It was, it sounded like something off a Lifetime, AJ Armstrong is a former NFL player. Him and his wife were murdered in their home. Their son, AJ Armstrong Jr., actually called it in. And, he to this day is holding on that, he saw someone and it was, maybe someone had broken into the house and killed his parents. So they tried him not once, not twice, but 3 times. And again, I don't know, without knowing if he actually really did it or not, going down in those weeds. I think some people are upset because they're like, where do they try people, this many times, having this many mistrials, don't prosecutors kind of have a cap that if they can't get it, after a certain amount of times, they just have to let it go. I think that's what stood out, other than also the fact that, such a gruesome murder for both of his parents to be shot by their child, no less. That they would try this case this many times. Have you heard of a case where they would try something this many times? Have you heard of any other case you can recall?
One, I haven't heard of any case where you take it, that many times after so many mistrials and different issues. Two, it's happening right in my, backyard. So I live in Houston, Texas, and I'm aware of the case. But three, what I'll say is, just like I said before a couple of times, right? I'm a personal injury attorney. I don't practice criminal law. But let's just talk generally about the issue, right? And keeping in line and theme with what we're discussing, is this an issue about it being a black man, which is why you're taking it so many times, or is it an issue about black justice? And that's the question, right? Because you also have two parents, to a black man and a black woman who are now deceased because of someone. And this is one of those unique cases, in my opinion, where you're going to have parties on both sides who are saying, justice needs to be done on the one end, and who cares how many times it takes. And then on the other end going, look, you didn't have it the first time, you didn't have it the second time, while we're at this again. What I'd say from a legal standpoint, obviously, if there's new evidence, that's the only way that you would be back in trial again to overcome that mistrial that you got to before. Because remember, you need that unanimous decision to actually convict someone. That there's 12 jurors of your peers. And I think that's one of the things that the Constitution got absolutely right. You still need those people in the box to say, yep, beyond reasonable doubt, this is it. And I think that mainstay has been one of our benefits throughout the years. But for this to continue to go on and to be so prevalent in the news, it does beg question of, what's going on here. And for people, especially lay people, me as an attorney, who kind of understands the criminal justice system, not intimately because I don't practice it, but who can get around through it. It still begs the question, like, where are we at? Like, what was the new evidence? What is so glaring that begs you to come back? And the ultimate question is, well, why didn't you have it the first time? Because at the end of the day, the psychological trauma that you put someone in, remember, these are his parents.
And he was a child when this first case. He was a teenager. I mean, he's an adult now, but people have to understand that this was a child they were trying in the beginning.
Exactly. So you're trying the kid. I've told you once, and again, no opinion about the scenario at all, but I'm just thinking of the life. I'm just thinking of the person. So I'm here. You tried me. You didn't. I'm acquitted, or you get a mistrial rather than acquitted. So you get the first one, and it's like, okay, woof, off my back. Like, I've tried to explain this to you. Then you come back for the second one. It's like, look, I'm giving you everything that I had. I'm telling you that no, and now you come back for the third one. And the real stink becomes, when you think about it, here we are, a case that's so public. It's not like it was something that you're in one state, nobody's ever heard it, now you're back here. It's you're calling back another 12 jurors to adjudicate this thing all over again, right? To hear it in the evidence. And I think the last one took, 11 days to get to that trial? So I mean, I don't really have an opinion about it either way, but I do think that either which way this verdict goes, it's going to be about Black justice, right? You're trying to get justice for those parents. You're trying for the other ones. Again, you're trying to get justice for this kid. But I do, like probably many people, look at the consideration of having to do this constantly for that young man's life, and what turns of that life if they get another mistrial, right?
So they did. So this was the third. Well, so no, so the first two were mistrials,
right?
So the third one was not a mistrial. They finally got a guilty verdict. He is planning to appeal it, but they finally on their third one got a guilty one. So yeah, a lot of people, again, mostly lay people that don't understand the law. I mean, we understand the law, but again, neither one of us are criminal law attorneys. That stood out how young he was. It stood out that it took so many times. This was a young Black boy being tried for murder for his parents. So yeah, they actually finally got a guilty. So and he has the right to appeal it. So I don't know, how successful he'll be with the appeal, and like you said, what evidence they even had in the first place to even bring it this many times. But it's definitely something in the news. Lot going on all over the United States. There's so much news. I feel like, even though I'm a news platform, I'm almost newsed out myself. So switching gears, thank you first of all for playing. Thank you for thank you for playing our around the hot topics with us. We appreciate just your general feedback and just like your understanding of the law and just like your opinion about these various topics. But we are not necessarily here about that today. We're actually here about you today. So my first question is, who were you before you were attorney? Who were you before? Like, before you became an attorney, you're NBA president now. Like, before all of this, like, who were you? Where are you from? Like, kind of what led you up to this point?
Yeah, I'm just a little country kid, and I know people say stuff like that, and they, it's just that, country twang and whatnot. But I really am. I'm from a little town called Cleburne, Texas. I jokingly tell people we had 15,000 when you count the cow. Right. We got our first Walmart when I was 9.
Wow.
There was a Kmart there for the longest. It's the county seat in Johnson County. So Cleburne is about 30 minutes south of Fort Worth. My graduating class was somewhere around high 300s, low fours. I can't really remember, but I'm just trying to give people an idea. It wasn't a big space that I grew up in. And really the issue is that from my town, and so we're still part of that Jim Crow segregation in Cleveland. So it's a railroad town, and most black people still live on the east side. Most white people live on the west. It's not really integrated that way.
Mhm.
And so we went through a lot of those struggles that you have heard about, right? Sundown towns and all of those stuff.
Mhm.
And the thing or driver for me was my family. My grandmother had 7 kids, and she was the oldest of 14. Out of that, me and my cousin were the first to graduate from college, not go, but graduate, and from my grandmother's immediate family. And it was just one of those things that we tried to show a different path. And so for me, it took a long time to get to somewhere like this, because you got big dreams growing up in the country. You never know where they're going to land you, but you just like, look, I can do something better with my life, and then hopefully be an inspiration to others. And so that's
There you are.
kind of
That's
where I've been.
yeah, for sure. Well, you tell us that you come from this small town, you had a small graduating class. At what point did you know, okay, I'm gonna go down this path and be an attorney, or I'm interested in the law? Like, was there a turning point? Because if I know, if you grow, a lot of people, if they grow up in places that are very segregated, or there are not a lot of opportunities, that kind of lights their fire maybe a little earlier to go down a path of justice. But I'm just curious, was it just that general sentiment, or did something happen where you were like, I think I need to go down this
Yeah.
path?
So mine, you would think, growing up the way I did, seeing the things I did, that would be the driving force. I just wanted to get out of my environment, really. So things that most people, I don't want to say most, things that some people may have experienced that others haven't, where police officers are kicking in your door, with an arrest warrant, looking for someone, where you're harassed just for jogging down the street at nighttime, um, to being, I distinctly remember this conversation. You're hanging out with your boys at an apartment complex, and someone calls, accusing, these black kids of sitting on the, corner, plotting to do some things. The police show up and they say, you're just the victim of a slow night, right? And I mean, you're talking like 8 squad cars that pulled up, on me and my friends, who played, high school basketball, who were captains of the team, those kind of things. And it took, that one white officer to be like, no, 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 I know those kids, they're not doing anything. Like, who called? And he was a sergeant when he showed up, and they're just like, oh, well, this is what happened. I mean, you would think that those things are what did it, and it wasn't. Like I said, my goal was to use education as a driver to get me out of the scenario that I was in. My father is an electrician, and so if there's any employment attorneys listening to this, please disregard. But by the age 13, I was working at a construction site, right?
So you're like, I'm not doing this forever, huh?
And yeah, and he was like, there's a whole story. I gave it during my inaugural speech, but the truth, he had me like out laboring. We wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was tedious. It was hard. It was hot. This Texas sun. I was digging trenches and moving buckets, and sitting on top of roofs, and moving, running wire, and it just, I've done it all. And my dad was just big on, if you don't want this kind of life, go get an education. And it didn't have to do with college. He didn't say that. It could have been vocational training or whatever. He just said, you need an education, and that's the only way that you move out of these circumstances. So to your point in your question, I started my own construction company when I was 21. I started on Valentine's Day. Literally went down to the county clerk, filed the DBA paperwork, and that's when I started my company. And so I had a contract, and we were doing some remodel. The economic downturn happened around the same time. That company lost about $250,000. And I mean, being a 21-year-old kid going from making like probably 20 grand a month is what I was doing to nothing. And then having all these creditors call you. I had about 5 people that worked for me at the time. And this is right around Christmas. Uh, you know, how bad that feels when you're, young 20s. You got these 30, 40-year-olds working for you with families and kids, and you can't make payroll. Like that is what flipped the switch for me. And it was, because then you start asking people like, what am I supposed to do when this happens to me? Like, do I just file a mechanics lien? What happens with like a breach of contract suit? I don't have any money to pay anybody. Like, what am I supposed to do? And that was the moment I was like, I want to protect myself. I want to protect my family. I want to protect people that look like me. I want to get those who just fragrantly say, you know what, to hell with these folks, and
Mhm.
just leave you kind of hanging. So that was my driver to go to law school. It was losing all that money and then feeling that anger about somebody just disregarding my life because of theirs, and it just really bothered me. So that's how I ended up going to law school.
Now, I'm looking at the age here. So were you just finishing college when you opened up the firm?
Yeah, so the funny thing was I was president of the Student Government Association. I was getting ready to graduate. I didn't have a job. And the only thing I knew to fall back on, even with the degree, right, is just you know what you know. So I
Mm-hmm.
knew construction. My uncle's a carpenter. I have another cousin that's a plumber. My dad's an electrician. I've been doing construction ever since I was a kid. That's all I knew. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna start this company, and then go from there. And because we had immediate success, right out the gate, had a couple of contracts, we were doing remodels and things like that. And I was probably in my last, I was in my last year when all this happened. I was driving back and forth from Wichita Falls back to DFW, handling some contracts, and yeah, things went terrible right after
Mm-hmm.
that.
Now, what law school did you go to?
Thurgood,
Went to Thurgood. Okay,
yeah, Texas
great,
Southern, yeah,
great.
yeah,
So,
HBCU
so,
bound, yeah.
so you decide, okay, I'm gonna go down this law path, get into Thurgood. You're there. What some people, if you're listening, you may not know, there are not that many HBCU law schools. They're very,
Six.
very, very right. I was gonna say very few, six. So some of us, you know, or I would say the majority of us who go to law school, we have the experience where we're kind of like the only person in the room or very few. So can you tell us how different your experience was at your law school where you may have not necessarily encountered being the only one
Yeah.
in the room, how that may differ? Because sometimes people say, the HBCU experience versus PWI.
I mean, I could talk to you all day about this, but let me say this. So during the time, and I think they still have the distinction of this. During the time that I went to Thurgood, we were known as the most diverse law school in America. So even though it's an HBCU, I think at the time 40% of the student body was African American, 30% was Hispanic. Um, I think it was like 20% that was white, and then it was like 5% Asian, and then they just classified other because there wasn't enough for them to cause a true base. If I recall correctly, it's something like that. It was like a third.
Mm-hmm.
And so my law school was probably emblematic of other people's law schools, except for the fact that it just had more black people. And in our HBCU environment, though, you do get this sense of pride, this connectivity to the learning and what has occurred to black people throughout this country. As an example, Thurgood Marshall School of Law, named after the jurist Thurgood Marshall, was only created, or excuse me, the school, Texas Southern University, was only created through segregation because they wouldn't allow human sweat admission into the University of Texas. And as a result, they said there's a Negro college down in Houston. Why don't we consider that to be a public school? After they, filed the lawsuit, so it's called Sweat v. Painter. Painter was the president of the University of Texas at the time. They go through, Thurgood Marshall is the arguer on behalf of Human Sweat. They argue this case in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court tells them that they have to integrate. And so the legislature at the time literally says, you know what? No, we're not integrating the University of Texas. We will create separate but equal. Equal is we will give Black people a school where they can have a law school. And Texas Southern University is created from that. And that's how it happened. It was the Houston Negro College, I think it was at the time. And even if you go to Texas Southern, there's still a plaque on one of the buildings and it says Houston Negro College. So that is a fact that you learn about the legal system that you wouldn't get as an experience somewhere else. You learn the history about what has occurred in America. You learn it, even though you're, going through all the process, right? Civ Pro, Crim Pro, constitutional law, contracts, everything else. The Baron Cow, as an example, like we learn the same stuff. It's just there are times where there is something very important that is historical and worthwhile knowing, and that we just get taught that in my opinion, does not get passed along at other institutions.
Yeah, I went to UVA, and then I went to New York law schools. I went to even though UVA I will tout, we have a very strong Black alumni network, and there were definitely more Black people there than I thought. I really thought it was, I was coming from DC, chocolate cities. I was like, oh, I'm gonna be the only one. So I was very excited to see that. It was clear that we were still the minority, but they definitely, I kind of think they went out of their way to also have like a good diversity population at the University of Virginia. That's one of the things UVA touts and so on. And then my law school was pretty much a Jewish law school. So I got all the Jewish holidays. I love that. Yeah. There's so many things that I always say, in hindsight, I should have UVA's fine, or maybe I should have went undergrad, HBCU. And then, I always, someone says if you were to do something differently, I hate that I didn't have the HBCU experience. I mean, I sort of had it because I went to Banneker right across the street from Howard. So I pretended to be a Howard girl for 4 years because my sister was right across the street. So I kind of got the experience because she was in college when I was across the street. But that's literally all I got. Like, that's the most I've ever got. So yeah, if I were to do, I don't know, maybe I would have gone to Spelman instead of UVA. I don't know, maybe I'll be in a different place. So
well, here's one thing that I'll say, and I say this openly, having had the experience. So I have an undergrad degree and a master's of business administration with a focus of finance from a PWI. I have my law degree from an HBCU. And this is no joke, it's just the truth. When you look at the rankings for HBCU law schools, there's only 6, right? The mission has generally been to provide access where it doesn't exist, or where no opportunity would have been afforded, as long as those people can do the work. So it's not a handout, right? But it is providing a resource. They are, I don't want to say overlooking those traditional concepts, right? So it's not your LSAT score just alone in your undergrad GPA. Because here's the truth. So I pledged, I'm a Kappa, right? And I played it, I may not be alone in this, but and not to suggest anything else, but just during that process, I was a knucklehead kid, right? So I thought Kappa was like end all be all. So I wasn't really paying attention to grades and importance and other things like that. So that's what I mean by at the moment that I pledged. And so when you look at my undergrad GPA, it doesn't fit the person that I was or am in reference to it, because I had some spotty moments where I was just like, I don't feel like doing all that. Right. And then at the same time, I was working while I was in undergrad. So I was having, I was a pre-med biology major. I tell people this all the time. Left, and at the time that semester, I was in anatomy and physiology, organic chemistry, histology, immunology, and taking English. And all 4 of those classes have a lab associated with them. So I went to school from 8 to noon every day, had lab Monday through Thursday, I think it was, from 1 to 5. And then I left and I was working at Albertsons at the time. I was the overnight grocery clerk. So that was just to make sure that I had food and could pay my rent. So now you're talking 5 to 10 every night that I worked. There wasn't any time to study. I wasn't studying anything. and then you put, I'm in capital on top of all that. I'm not really worried about nothing. You know what I mean? And so when you look at having this opportunity to go to Thurgood, I had a dismal GPA, had a decent LSAT score, but the other institutions wouldn't take me. It's just like your undergrad GPA, your LSAT score, they don't align. And I had a 4.0 with my master's program, a master's in business from the top accreditation of business schools, 3.9, I think it was actually a 3.9 GPA. Didn't even consider it. They're like, nope, your undergrad GPA, that's all that matters. That's the only way we can compare you to everybody else. And so when I went to school there, there's this undercurrent of we don't hire from there, right? And that's more prevalent in the Houston legal community than it is in kind of Texas than it is anywhere else. It's just what happens. And it's some of the other HBCUs experience this as well. But like you going to UVA, people will say, "No, she went to UVA." It doesn't matter her rank. It doesn't matter. No, she went to UVA. For me, graduating top 10% of my class, being, SBA president, being in the law review, like all that still didn't matter. Like you try to go to big law, have an interview with big law. It was just like, nope, we're not considering that. Yeah. So this is the truth. And for your folks who may be hiring partners or, considering law school, it's just the dynamic that you go through. I could have left TSU after my first year. Many students do. They use it as a stepping stone, they go to somewhere else because they're not calculated into, all the rankings and everything else. So by the time you do well in law school, you can move up. Essentially, you can just transfer because nobody cares. It's just whatever happens at the end of your degree. So I just never left. I was like, look, I'm gonna be the change. I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna see, try to shed a positive light, and I'm gonna tell this story everywhere I go because it's the truth. People need to know that.
Well, I think the sentiment you're getting at is, unlike a PWI, they looked at you as a whole person. You felt like your application was not just your GPA, not just your LSAT, not just what you have your GPA and your master's program. They really looked at you as a whole, and you don't necessarily get that benefit in some of the other application processes at the PWI. Sometimes it's a very stringent, like if you don't have this, sorry, no exceptions to the rule and things like that. Well, I heard you say something about pre-med. You said all those courses making my head dizzy. I knew I was never going to be a doctor, even if I wanted to be a lawyer. It's so funny because I laughed at half of the people on my floor at UVA. So I'm gonna be a doctor. I'm gonna be a doctor. I said, yeah, we're gonna wait. We're gonna wait to the end of the semester, and we'll see how many of y'all are still gonna want to be doctors. Literally, the next semester was maybe one person that was still pre-med. Everybody else decided to be something else. So what were your favorite courses? What was your favorite class in law school, and what class that you didn't really like that much?
Oh, wow. That's a question. I think my favorite course was torts. I mean, if I really have to think about it. Yeah, I mean, given what I do now, but torts was like that one thing that just made absolute sense. It was like, how do you do that? That didn't make any sense. Like I still remember the banana peel scenario. And so I think what happened to me in torts was like, what can you dream up that you could associate negligence against someone? Like, were they really negligent? That was like the rabbit hole to go down for me. It was, trying to figure out and associate causation because so many people have so many issues. But it's like, okay, well, if I was on the other side, I would argue this, this, and this, and this, and if I was on this side, I would argue that. So that would be it. The class I hated was this class called Fed Jur. It was just the worst class. And I was president of the Student Bar Association. At Thurgood, the president gets the ability to go into the faculty senate, speak their mind. And I constantly told them, y'all need to get rid of this course. This is just the dumbest course I've ever taken. Because it was like this mix between federal jurisdiction and constitutional law. And in my head, I was like, we've already had this course. So it's not like it was a new class or something distinct. It was just the same repetition, not being taught different way. It was because I'm convinced some professor had tenure and they could just, this is the class they wanted to teach, and they created it so long ago, and they were like, this class has to be taught. And I could not stand it. I don't even know if it's on the agenda anymore, but Thurgood, if you're listening, y'all need to get rid of that class. I hate that class. I cannot stand that class. It
Well,
was
that's
so
good.
pointless to me. It was the most pointless class I'd ever taken.
Well, that's a good segue to you now being you were a student. You were the president of your bar association. You were the student president at your law school, and now you're the NBA president. But before I segue, and maybe I can guess this, but if none of this worked out, you didn't go back to the construction business, you weren't going to be a lawyer, what do you think you would have ended up doing?
So when I was getting my master's degree, I worked at the university. And so I was the coordinator of multicultural affairs for Midwestern State University. When I decided to go to law school, it was a toss-up. I took my GMAT and my LSAT, and I was going to go get my doctorate in business and be a professor.
Oh.
That was the thought. So I didn't know which one I wanted to do, but I ended up going to law school. But that was the only other option I could think of, and that's what I was getting my degree in.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to segue to just some final questions about you being the new National Bar Association president. Just quickly for our listeners that may not be, sometimes I say NBA and everybody immediately thinks of basketball, like, oh, what's NBA? They're like, what? And I'm like, the National Bar Association. So can you tell us how that maybe, people hear American Bar, there's so many bar associations. So why the National Bar Association is very special?
So let me give a little historical context, and I'll tell you why it's special to me. The National Bar Association was founded in 1925. We are approaching our centennial celebration. We're in our 99th year, and founded during a time where it was written that Black people could not join the American Bar Association. When I was coming up in my 20s, it was when I learned that if you see an organization that starts with national, it usually stands or means that this is an organization with predominantly African Americans in it, Black people. Because for most of these organizations, it was Negro, right? And the easiest way to transition it was national. So if you hear like ABA or the American Dental Society, or so forth, whatever ones that you can think of, that usually was the American was the standard. They were like, we're America, we're American. That was the white organization. The National Bar Association was founded in that environment where they could not join the ABA, and they would not ABA would not recognize Black people as practicing law, lawyers. When you look at the NBA, to me, it is like the most best kept secret that should not be a secret. All of the legends that we talk about that helped us overwrite the laws in this country, that were instrumental in progressive change, that were engaged in the fight in civil rights, they were all NBA lawyers. Thurgood Marshall was a former secretary of the National Bar Association. Fred Gray, who was the attorney to Rosa Parks, Dr. King, was one of our past presidents. Ben Crump, who everybody knows today, we just talked about him. He's one of our past presidents. This organization has been around, and it has trained lawyers throughout the country to prepare for the situations that we face, and then also serve as a resource for people within our community. So for the longest, everyone's heard about the NAACP. I take nothing from them. Urban League, nothing from them. I believe everybody has a job. Right. But in this work within civil rights, we, the National Bar Association, and there's plenty of people who have, came into the organization, left, and said, we want to create this different version. And so they take it and they say, we have the National Blacks, such and such, such and such. But the National Bar Association is where all of this was started, because we didn't have an option. And this was our opportunity to band together. And so today you see not only those famous persons that I'm talking about, but members of the federal bench, members of the state bench, prosecutors at the highest level, attorneys doing well within their respective practice areas. This is our opportunity to come together every time that we meet to make sure we're sharpening those tools to fight injustice wherever it is. But this organization has been around for almost 100 years, and I hope to see it for the next 100.
Well, I love how you say the almost like the best kept secret because so I was a top 40 under 40 national bar recipient. And prior to maybe even being awarded this, I may have just heard about the National Bar maybe 2 years prior. And I'm like, well, how come nobody, no one, and sometimes it's like, well, maybe you need to look on your own. But again, coming out of New York Law School and, where I live, like just no one was talking about it. So again, I made maybe 2 years prior to receiving top 40 under 40. I had learned about the Bar Association. Of course, I had learned about the award and I was nominated and I ended up receiving it. But it was a very kind of like humbling moment to realize that I didn't know. So like you said, it's like the best you got a host of a Black Lawyers podcast. It's a top 40 under 40 for the NBA. There are a lot of people that really are a part of the NBA. And I think whether it be this podcast or having a president such as yourself to bring more visibility and awareness to the Bar Association, this is the Black Lawyers podcast we have to put on for the National Bar Association, without a doubt. Like you said, not to take away from all the other organizations and what they're doing. We've partnered even with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and did a fundraiser. Not to take away, but again, it all started with National Bar Association. So I'm excited you are the president. I'm assuming visibility is part of what you ran on in terms of making it more of a visible organization. Can you quickly just tell us to close out, like what people can expect for, during your tenure in terms of some of the things that you kind of are bringing to the front and what is your focus for this upcoming?
Yeah. So, and I appreciate that. I'll tell you, for me, it's about relevancy, right? And if we can't answer that question here in our 99th year, why are you relevant? Why does it make sense for anybody to care about the National Bar Association? Why should we give our dollars to you? What are you doing out in the community to progress the interests of Black people, to progress the interests of the Black lawyer? If I can't answer that question, then no, I don't need to be at the helm of the National Bar Association. And quite frankly, we don't need to exist. So for me, you're correct. The visibility issue is one of those matters. But more importantly, it's about what are we doing for our people? What are we doing out in the community? I can tell you, we have 4 conferences that are always laid out every bar year. One is in the fall, one is in the spring. We take an international trip, and then you have your annual convention. One of the biggest challenges that I created for my own self was saying that we're going to go to Florida. And we're going to take a conference into Florida, and we're going to be there to support our people, not in a negative sense, not to really care about or to shine light upon what politicians are doing down there, but to say there's a resource here that we can actually collaborate with as a collective, and what can we do for our people? So we're partnering with the NAACP. We're partnering with local civil rights leaders. We're acknowledging the work that's going on. Today, I was just on a call with a law firm. Do you know that they are still fighting the last integration case in America in the state of Florida? That they're actually fighting that case right now. And there's so many things that are going on in that community. I'm from Texas, right? It could be labeled as like the cousin to Florida. What some of the things that politicians do down here is similar to what's going on over there. When I was a little boy, my father's from Mississippi, and I still distinctly remember him telling me a story about his dad and how his dad taught him, you can't look white people in the eye. When they walk down the street, you need to stand against the wall, let them pass, don't say anything, look down at the ground. That's the environment he grew up in. That's Jim Crow. That's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. For me, I didn't grow up in that environment, but like I expressed to you earlier, there wasn't, you're the victim of a slow night. And if the dial had been reset 30 years ago, maybe, just maybe, somebody would have, intended to do me harm rather than come to my rescue within that police force. So for me, looking at how we are relevant. What can we do to make sure that we are visible? Yes, but more importantly, wherever we go, are we giving back to that community? Are we there with a purpose to say, hey, let's not only sharpen our own tools, but let's also sharpen the community that we're visiting? And if you can't say that by the time I leave, then that to me is, mission critical. And so I would have failed. But if wherever the NBA goes, if you say, yeah, it may sound controversial, but let me tell you, they went down there with a purpose and they were successful in that purpose. They left a positive impact on that community. They gave, back to that community, and they left them with, newfound tools to attack the issues. That's what's important to me. Along that line, we have partnership as an example with Wells Fargo home lending, where we're in the community talking about how do we create Black generational wealth and how do we sustain it. So we have a program that's coming up around the time of CBC in DC, where we're going to be launching the first of this Economic Empowerment Institute critical series. We've done it in the past, but we're reviving it. Bringing it back. We have a Know Your Rights town hall where we go into communities and make sure that they understand the talk, so to speak, right? So what happens when you have an interactions with police? What are you supposed to do when those interactions go negative? How do you make sure that you preserve evidence for your criminal defense attorney later on down the road so that you can maintain justice? Don't sit there and try to fight a war on the side of the street. Let that play out as it needs to, but let us also make sure that you're protecting your interests. We have a partnership with the National Black Real Estate Attorneys doing that same thing, a tour of all the Black cities where there are, all the cities where there are Black mayors in our Black Mayor Tour. So there's just so many things that we're trying to bring to the forefront so that people know that we're engaged, we're passionate about this work. Yes, we are lawyers of various practice areas, but when we band together, we take that institutional knowledge to make sure that we can do the best work for our people, and that's all we want to do.
So if someone's listening to this, I believe there's a student member. You don't have to be licensed yet. You have a student membership as well. So if there's a law student or lawyer interested, do they just go to the main website? Is the membership kind of just like year round? Whenever you pay your dues, it's for that year. How does someone become a member and get involved?
Yeah, so nationalbar.org, nationalbar.org. If you go there up to the right, you'll see members or join now. You click that and you can easily pay your dues. Now for law students, it's free. You pay nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, you go on the site, you click, you put your information in, you're officially a member. And it's been that way since day one. The only thing that a law student would have to pay for is their section dues or divisional dues. So just so you all are aware, a division is I like to say who you are, right? So we have like the women lawyers division. We have the LGBTQ division. Government lawyers is a division. It's like who you are, who you resonate with. A section is what you practice. So if you're a corporate lawyer, if you are an IP like yourself, or for me as personal injury, that's a section, that's what you practice. So if you're a law student, or even if you're not even barred, if you're just a layperson and you want the information that comes from us, you can join. We have auxiliary memberships for folks that are not practicing. We have memberships for people that are retired. So there's opportunity for everyone to join under this big tent and make sure that you help us, because those dollars go directly to impact. We don't take anything from that to make it capital building or anything like that. Those dollars go to the operations for us to do those programs that I talked about before.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we close out every episode with a Black Excellence Moment of the Week. Like I said, there's so much bad news going on. We like to end each episode at the upbeat fact. So I'm going to read these names. Ramardi Wilfred, Anila Beavers, and Alana George have been named currently to have the highest IQs in the world. And they're three black children. A little boy, one little boy and two little girls. Romani has an IQ score of, Romani in particular has an IQ score of 162, higher than Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking. So I thought that was really cool. Sometimes, like you said, Beth kept secret, like, why is this story going viral? That, there are three of the current people in the world that have the highest IQs are three Black children. Would never have guessed it. I came across this and I said, yeah, they're going to be my Black excellence moment of the week. So I'm sure they'll be doing very good things in their future. They already have higher IQs than us. So I can only imagine what they'll be doing. They could be anything, lawyers, astronauts. But yeah, that is our Black excellence moment of the week. And we just appreciate you. We know you're very busy as an attorney and new National Bar president. So we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And as always, we're rooting for everyone Black. Take care, everyone.